Well, it seems like it was a moment ago that we went through the 2016 election cycle, with all the drama and theatrics and kind of craziness of that. And then here we are, like right on top of it, it's happening again. And what is easy to see is that there's a lot of tension involved around this. And in fact, there was a study published last month in the Journal of American College Health. Found that 1/4 of college students experienced clinically significant symptoms of trauma from the 2016 election results. I mean, that's your basic PTSD. And I remember that election that evening very well because I was teaching a week-long silent meditation retreat. I don't know if any of you were there, but up in Maryland, there was about 100 people. And the usual silent meditation retreat, you have this schedule, and everybody kind of does their thing, and it's very quiet. And we thought, well, we all kind of know how things are going to turn out. And if people don't even want to know, they don't have to know. We weren't even going to announce it. We just put up a notice on the board. And if you want to look to see who won the election, you flip it up, and it tells you the answer. Well, that evening was quite an evening. People were knocking on my door at 2 a.m. And so we completely altered the kind of usual flow of the course. And we held meetings for people to discuss their emotions, and we worked with how to be with disappointments and et cetera. So the divisions that we're experiencing now in America, I mean, it's so palpable. And there's this, seems like a crescendo of volatility, aggression involved with what your opinions are. I'm not sure that we've had this kind of disparate split since the Civil War. Maybe we did around the time of the Vietnam War. That's another time in history that kind of comes to mind. And so there's many analyses, different analyses of how we've gotten to this point. How has this happened? How did we land here? And I'm not about to try to parse all the different ones out, but certainly the Princeton study of 2014 was a very interesting study, and it was kind of taking a look at the what kind of government we have. It begged the question, who really rules things, And these Princeton researchers, a guy named Gillens and another guy named Page, their argument is that America's political system has been slowly transforming from a democracy to an oligarchy, where the wealthy elites wield the power and make the important decisions. And they say this: the central point that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence. So they looked back, beginning in around 1980 up into the early 2000s, at different policy decisions and determined which groups supported certain policy decisions and then what happened historically. One thing they looked at, that they took just people that were in the 50th percentile of economic, abundance, just those people. And then they took just the people that were in the 90th percentile, and they looked at the policies that each of them supported over these 30, 40 years almost. And it proved significantly different that those in the 90th percentile of economic well-being carried almost all their policy wishes were carried through, and not nearly as much of the people in the 50th percentile. So, I mean, it's not a new development. Researchers have been talking about this, and it's pre the Citizens United. This has been kind of happening. You know, this movement of resources from the poor, the working class, the middle class, to a smaller group of people. I don't think anybody would argue that that's happening. Now, of course, historically, if that happens and continues to happen, this consolidation of power and resources, there's trouble ahead. Because people don't stand for it forever. And then things begin to happen. And currently we're in a time where what democracy we have left, however you determine it, it's amazing. We have such a low voter turnout. Even in 2016, only 58% of the eligible voters voted. So that means that, and it was a close election, that means that like 29% of the eligible voters chose who would be president and who would be, senators, congresspeople, etc. And in off-year elections, if we get to 40%, that's a big deal. And they're thinking we may go beyond that this time, but maybe not a whole lot. And so you can have a Congress elected by 19 or 20% of the eligible voters. It's a very weak participation. Maybe that's changing, I mean, I could go on and on about this, and what was once possibly more of a democracy may be less of one right now. And we're here because we're interested in meditation practice, spiritual growth, that exploration. And it would certainly seem to me that the crux of human problems are consciousness problems. We've got the scientific knowledge and we have the resources and wherewithal to actually create or support a healthy environment and support as many people as there are living on the earth now with a dignified existence. Now, whether consciousness can raise itself up to meet this challenge, it's not determined. It's not over yet, as Yogi Berra would say. It ain't over till it's over. And we can still mostly breathe the air. And we can mostly drink the water if we put enough chemicals in it. So we're in progress. And listening to the news or reading the news, not just the election cycle, I'm always reminded of the Buddha's timeless teaching about the energies of the three poisons and how they play out. And the first poison energy that he taught and encouraged his students to reflect on in themselves and in their communities was that of greed. That drive, that survival drive that we have, we never have enough resources. We always need more. It's just never enough. Regardless of the cost to the common welfare, or in a big sense, our environment, And the second poison that he repeatedly came back to and encouraged folks to reflect on is hatred or aversion. And that's an umbrella series of energies that could be anything from anger, revenge, fear, guilt, shame, and of course hatred. And that's a kind of pushing away, a not wanting. There's greed, the grasping, and then there's the pushing away with the aversion. And then the third that he talked about, the third poison, is delusion. And really, what he was saying is, look, you got to come to understand the way nature works. In order to take care of everything, we have to understand the way that it works. That it's not, that the resources in nature are really not unlimited. And that, yes, the foundation of nature is that everything is changing and in flux. And that there are effects from causes that are put into play. And that stress, suffering, etc., is caused by kind of being lost in a grasping or lost in aversion or hatred of some kind. Those are the aspects of human life driven by survival, not wanting anything that's unpleasant, wanting more and more resources so we can live forever. So these energies are active, and when we look at the news, or when we look or listen to the news, say, "Oh gosh, that's greed running amok," or that's totally delusionary that we can just keep harvesting something forever and not pay a price, or there's hatred or fear in action, So these energies, they create and underscore and support the divisions. They divide us from each other, and they also, these energies, fragment us internally. So what about our practice? Where does it come in? How can it help? How can it bridge both these internal separations that we sometimes feel, these fragmentations, and the external separations that are such a threat to the survivability of our biosphere? So in this practice, in this little laboratory of our personal meditation practice, we're talking about kind of looking inward, turning inward, and having the courage to face some of that internal fragmentation. Maybe the fear, the guilt, the grief, the shame, self-loathing, whatever it may be. And to recognize it, to be with it in a tender way. Bringing care to those difficult emotions. Accepting them as part of being human. It's part of the panoply of being a human being. Without judging ourselves. And doing this over and over patiently with care, the best that we're able. And cultivating the practice, the very basic practice of mindfulness. Of practicing being awake to what's happening now. And developing a loving friendliness practice or a compassion practice. They help bridge those internal separations. Create a greater capacity for self-acceptance, self-love. It's a practice. It's healing. And so the Buddha not only talked about working internally, he talked about externally. Exercising these kind of powers of practice externally. And to bridge these external separations. But it's carried out in the same manner, more or less. Those moments when you have this contraction from another. You can feel it if you're awake at the time, saying, I'm pulling back. And maybe it's because of their differing political affiliation. Maybe it's because of their race, their ethnicity, their class, their gender. sexual orientation, disability. You know, there's all these ways that we separate and contract from others, and that's all the grist for our practice. And so our mindfulness will allow us to see that contraction early on in the game. Ooh, you know, just the way that person was dressed, or they had a Make America Great Again hat on, or they had a Leslie Coburn button. Whatever pushes your buttons, you know, we notice that contraction. That's the first step. That's the first mindful step. And then bringing a soft attention to that part of the body where we're feeling this separation. And we notice what thoughts are associated. Thoughts are just images and internal talking. You know? And so accepting as best we can whatever's arising with as little judgment. And knowing that, look, most of our conditioning about this sense of separation was installed in us early on. You know? When I think about all the stuff that was poured into me by my parents and immediate culture, it was poured in over a period of time, and it's going to take time to uninstall that. It's not like, oh, I no longer have a racist thought, or I no longer have this prejudice or that. It's not so easy, you know. So being aware of those moments when we're contracting or pulling away, or there's a particular thought or image or internal talking that pops up. Ah, look, this relational field is now changed. I'm contracted, separated out. Is it possible then, through that mindful awareness, to summon up some empathy? You know, to bring some care into that relational field that's been cut, you know? It's a lifetime of work. But progress can be made. I know it, I know it personally. You know? Slowly loosening. They don't appear as much as they used to. The internal prejudicial voice quiets some, you know? There's an arc of progress. You know, and I'm sure some of you heard this NPR interview. It was a week or so ago, and I went and got the book. It's how I often get a lot of the books. You know, they have an author on there. And so I just finished reading this book called Strangers in Their Own Land. Anger and Mourning, meaning grief, on the American Right, by a woman named Arlie Hochschild. Now, Hochschild is a sociology professor at UCal Berkeley, all right? And she's lived in Berkeley, as it's also known. She's lived in a very left bubble most of her life. And she's trying to understand this division. She's a sociologist. So what she decides to do is, I'm going to get out of here for a while, or spend a lot of time and get out of here, and I'm going to pick and do research where is the most right-wing area of the country, and I'm going to go and live there. She's in her early 70s, you know, and with some gumption. And so she chooses to go and move to Louisiana, a little bit west of New Orleans, down in the bayou there. And she especially picked that area, not because it's, you know, always voting Tea Party, and the Tea Party's really strong there, right wing. It's a very, very fundamentalist religious area. But also she's interested in the paradox, because that particular area has the most environmental devastation that a person could imagine. And the older people who lived there grew up with cypress trees 200 feet tall that were thousands of years old, clean water that they could fish in, they could hunt, they could swim. It was their life. There are no cypress trees. You can't get in the water. You shouldn't even put your hand in the water. The sediment is so filled with dangerous chemicals that have settled. You don't ever want to stir up the mud. Along the Mississippi, there are 85 miles approximately on both sides of various chemical plants and these are materials we use, plastics, et cetera, but they line the Mississippi there. So she moved to this area, and got to know these people. They took her into their homes. She had a couple of introductions, and she got an introduction to these two women that were close to her age, I think, but they were diametrically opposed politically, but they were good friends. They hung out together, they loved each other's families, they knew and took care of each other's children, et cetera, et cetera. So, but she was mostly interested in the right wing. So she was invited into these homes. She attended church services. She went to political rallies, Tea Party rallies. She went and visited them at their workplace. She explored with them the paradoxes of, you knew what this place was like. How can you support the elimination of the Environmental Protection Agency? How can you do that? You've seen what's happened. So she's exploring all this with them. And it's fascinating. And I want to read you a little bit of it. As she was getting to know them over a couple years, she was trying to understand what she called their deep story. What is that about? And I'll read you a little bit of what she did, or what she came up with. She says this: behind all, I was learning about bayou and factory childhoods and the larger context, industry, state, church, regular media, Fox News. The lives of those I had come to know lay, I realized, a deep story. A deep story is a feels as if story. It's the story feelings tell in the language of symbols. It removes judgment. It removes fact. It tells us how things feel. Such a story permits those on both sides of the political spectrum to stand back and explore the subjective prism through which the party on the other side sees the world. And I don't believe we understand anyone's politics, right or left, without it. For we all have a deep story. There are many kinds of deep story, of course. Lovers come to know each other's childhood in order to understand how it feels to be the other person. They learn a personal deep story. Foreign leaders and diplomats try to understand national deep stories in order to relate more effectively to world leaders. They gather international deep stories. The deep story here, that of the Tea Party, focuses on relationships between social groups within our national borders. I constructed this deep story to represent, in metaphorical form, the hopes, fears, pride, shame, resentment, and anxiety in the lives of those I talked with. Then I tried it out on my Tea Party friends to see if they thought it fit their experience. So she created this story of understanding after being with them for years, and then reflected it back. Did I get it or not? Uh-oh. Oh. Come on now. Oh, yeah. Like a play, it unfolds in scenes, she says. And she calls one section waiting in line. And this is her reflecting back what she thinks is their story, and they've agreed to this. You are patiently standing in a long line leading up a hill, as in a pilgrimage. You are situated in the middle of this line, along with others who are also white, older, Christian, and predominantly male, some with college degrees, some not. Just over the brow of the hill is the American dream. the goal of everyone waiting in line. Many in the back of the line are people of color, poor, young, and old, mainly without college degrees. It's scary to look back. There are so many behind you, and in principle, you wish them well. Still, you've waited a long time, worked hard, and the line is barely moving. You deserve to move forward a little faster. You're patient but weary. You focus ahead, especially on those at the very top of the hill. The American dream is a dream of progress. The idea that you're better off than your forebears, just as they superseded their parents before you, and extends beyond, and this extends beyond money and stuff. You've suffered long hours, layoffs, and exposure to dangerous chemicals at work, and received reduced pensions. You have shown moral character through trial by fire, and the American dream of prosperity and security is a reward for all of this, showing who you have been and are, a badge of honor. The source of the American dream is on the other side of the hill. It's hidden. Has the economy come to a strange standstill? Is my company doing okay? Will I get a raise this year? Are there good jobs for us all, or just a few? Will we be waiting in line forever? It's so hard to see over the brow of the hill. The sun is hot and the line unmoving. In fact, is it moving backward? You haven't gotten a raise in years, and there's no talk of one. Actually, if you are short a high school diploma or even a BA, your income has dropped over the last 20 years. That has happened to your buddies too. In fact, some of them have stopped looking for good jobs because they figure for guys like them, good jobs aren't out there. You've taken the bad news in stride because you're a positive person. You're not a complainer. You count your blessings. You wish you could help your family and church more because that's where your heart is. You'd like them to feel grateful to you for being so giving to them. But this line isn't moving. And after all your intense effort, all your sacrifice, you're beginning to feel stuck. You think of things to feel proud of. Your Christian morality, for one. You've always stood up for clean living, monogamous, heterosexual marriage. That hasn't been easy. You've been through a separation yourself, a near or actual divorce. Liberals are saying your ideas are outmoded, sexist, homophobic, but it's not clear what their ideas are, what their values are. And given a climate of secular tolerance, you remember better times when as a child you said morning prayer and the flag salute before under God became optional in public school. Second scene, the line cutters. Look, you see people cutting in line ahead of you. You're following the rules. They aren't. As they cut in, it feels like you're being moved back. How can they just do that? Who are they? Some are black. Through affirmative action plans pushed by the federal government, they're being given preference for places in college and universities, apprenticeships, jobs, welfare payments, and free luncheons. And they hold a certain secret place in people's minds, as we see below. Women, immigrants, refugees, public sector workers. Where will it end? Your money is running through a liberal sympathy sieve you don't control or agree with. These are opportunities you'd have loved to have had in your day, and either you should have had them when you were young, or the young shouldn't be getting them now. It's not fair. And President Obama, how did he rise so high? The biracial son of a low-income single mother becomes president of the most powerful country in the world. You didn't see that coming. And if he's there, what kind of a slouch does his rise make you feel like? You who are supposed to be so much more privileged. Or did Obama get there fairly? How did he get into an expensive place like Columbia University? How did Michelle Obama get enough money to go to Princeton and then Harvard Law School with a father who was a city water plant employee? You've never seen anything like it. not up close. The federal government must have given them money. And Michelle should feel grateful for all she has, but sometimes she seems mad. She has no right to feel mad. And women, another group is cutting ahead of you in line. If you're a man, women demanding the right to men's jobs. Your dad didn't have to compete with women for scarce positions at the office. Also jumping in line ahead of you are overpaid public sector employees, and a majority of them are women and minorities. It also seems to you that they work shorter hours in more secure and overpaid jobs, enjoying larger pensions than yours. That assistant administrator at the Department of Regulation has cushy hours, a fat pension awaiting her, lifetime tenure, and she's probably sitting at her screen doing online shopping. What has she done to deserve perks that you don't enjoy? And immigrants, and now Filipinos, Mexicans, Arabs, Indians, and Chinese on special visas or green cards are ahead of you in line. Or maybe they snuck in. You've seen Mexican-looking men building the man camps that are to house Sasol's Filipino pipe fitters. That's a big... In the New Orleans area, there's another huge plant, mega plant going in, and they have, they're bringing in immigrants to build the plant, and then they're going to bring in immigrants to work in the plant, thousands and thousands of people. You see the Mexicans work hard, and you admire that, but they work for less and lower white American pay. And refugees. 4 million Syrian refugees are fleeing war and chaos. Thousands a day appearing in boats on the shores of Greece. President Obama accepted 10,000 of them, 2/3 women and children, to settle in the United States. But word has it that 90% of the refugees are young men, possibly ISIS terrorists, poised to get in line ahead of you and get their hands on your tax money. And what about you? You've suffered floods, oil spills, and chemical leaks. There are days when you feel like a refugee yourself. And then there's the brown pelican. Unbelievably standing ahead of you in line is a brown pelican, fluttering its long, oil-drenched wings. The Louisiana state bird, pictured on the state flag, nests in mangrove trees on ribbons of sand along the coast. The pelican was at one time nearly wiped out by chemical pollution, but in 2009 it was removed from the endangered species list, a year before the 2010 BP oil spill. To keep surviving, it now needs clean fish to eat, clean water to dive in, oil-free marshes, and protection from coastal erosion. That's why it's in line ahead of you. But really, it's just an animal, and you're a human being. Blacks, women, immigrants, refugees, brown pelicans, all have gotten ahead of you in line. But it's people like you who have made this country great. You feel uneasy. It has to be said, the line cutters irritate you. They are violating rules of fairness. You resent them, and you feel it's right that you do. So do your friends. Fox commentators reflect your feelings, for your deep story is also the Fox News deep story. You're a compassionate person, but now you've been asked to extend your sympathy to all the people who have cut in front of you. So you have your guard up against requests for sympathy. People complain, racism, discrimination, sexism. You've heard stories of oppressed blacks, dominated women, weary immigrants, closeted gays, desperate refugees. But at some point you say to yourself, you have to close the borders to human sympathy, especially if there are some among them who might bring you harm. You've suffered a good deal yourself, but aren't complaining about it. Then there's the last chapter, I think, called Betrayal. Then you become suspicious. If people are cutting in line ahead of you, someone must be helping them. Who? Who's helping? A man is monitoring the line, walking up and down it, ensuring that the line is orderly and that access to the dream is fair. His name is President Barack Hussein Obama. But hey, you see him waving to the line cutters. He's helping them. He feels extra sympathy for them that he doesn't feel for you. He's on their side. He's telling you that these line cutters deserve special treatment, and they had a harder time than you've had. You don't live near the line cutters or have close friends in most categories of the line cutters, but from what you can see or hear on Fox News, the real story doesn't correspond to his story about the line cutters. which celebrates so many black people, women, and immigrants. The supervisor wants you to sympathize with the line cutters, but you don't want to. It's not fair. In fact, the president and his wife are line cutters themselves. You feel betrayed. The president is their president, not your president. Now you have your guard way up. Watch out for lies. Presidents and other officials often wear a small pin showing the American flag, a flag pin. Did you see what a small flag pin he is wearing today? Maybe that means he's not proud of America. So the great pride you feel in being an American cannot be conveyed through him. As a source of honor, being an American is more important to you than ever, given the slowness of this line to the American dream, and given disrespectful talk about whites and men and Bible-believing Christians. Obama's story seems fishy. You're not a paranoid type, but it seems to you that either the federal government funded Obama's education, or worse, even secret strings were pulled. A friend of yours asked whether or not you noticed that Obama took off his wristwatch for Ramadan. She is referring to a custom removing jewelry during the Muslim holy month. He was brought up on the Quran, a neighbor says. You may not have the biggest house, but you can certainly be proud of being an American. And anyone who criticizes America, well, they're criticizing you. And if you can no longer feel pride in the United States through its president, you'll have to feel American some other way, by banding with others who feel as strangers in their own strange land. It goes on, and maybe I'll just read one more. Meanwhile, for the white Christian, older, right-leaning Louisianans, I came to know the deep story was a response to a real squeeze. So I'll just stop there. So she made this attempt to bridge separation by really trying to get their story. What were they feeling? But it's not about capitulation. Yes, the effort to understand and bridge, but it doesn't mean that we capitulate, give up on the environment, or give up on other things that seem important. We're making our best guess in a way, you know. And we had an election in 2016 that many of you here probably were shocked by and unhappy with. But we don't know the end result of that. And maybe I'm being Pollyanna-ish. But I know in my own life that sometimes great pain and trial has led to growth and healing. And so, if you're of the political persuasion that sees and feels that many people have been hurt in these last 2 years, maybe that's so. But maybe at the other end of it might be greater participation in this democracy, people coming together to try to heal, just maybe. And we can't know because we're not omnipotent. So sometimes when things happen that we feel are just the end of the world, well, maybe not so much. You know, maybe there's going to be a period of trouble and greater suffering. But maybe at the other end of that is greater understanding, greater compassion, people working together to solve the challenges that we have and to bridge these divisions. And so when this nice little old lady moved to Louisiana to try to see what it was like, you know, and some of those people have as a kind of an addendum, and she adds an addendum to the book about Charlottesville and what happened here. But she's also been visited by some of those people from Louisiana because she invited them. So they've come to Berkeley. And some of their comments were, well, where are all the naked hippies? You know? So things may be more possible, you know, and whatever happens tonight, we've got the tools to go inside and work with if there's grief arising or fear or whatever it is, to be with us, to be with it and be with ourselves with compassion. And know that the long story hasn't played out yet. There's still time. It ain't over. So I wish whoever you voted for got elected. Just kind of notice the feelings that come up, and how you can work with them. So hurry back to your media and see what happened tonight. We'll see you next week, same time.